So today I am presenting on halting the myths in their tracks and dispelling cancer nutrition myths with scientific evidence. And one of the reasons why I chose this topic is truly because of how much misinformation there is out there, not only in nutrition itself, but nutrition and cancer as well. And when it comes to nutrition and cancer, there's a lot of fear that is associated with nutrition and cancer. As cancer survivors, when you're diagnosed with cancer, there's so much fear and there is so much that is out of your control that oftentimes a lot of people will turn towards nutrition because it is something that is within our control. And with that, sometimes we want such tight control over it, it leads to restricting foods more than we should. So that is why I chose this, to help really solidify some of those common facts out there and really disprove them and hopefully make people feel more comfortable in their approach moving forward. So let's get started. Just a couple objectives today. We're going to cover 4 different myths. The first one is sugar feeding cancer. We're going to talk about soy and estrogen and breast cancer, but also that includes prostate cancer or other hormonally based cancers in there. We're going to talk about the alkaline diet because I think this one comes up quite a bit for patients, but it's not addressed enough. And then also organic foods. And I'm going to try to make sure that I explain these myths in a way that's super easy for you to understand, easy enough for you to understand that you would be able to share this with your friend or your neighbor when they maybe question certain things about nutrition. So just a little bit about me. I'm a registered dietitian. I also have my master's in nutrition and fitness. I am a board certified oncology dietitian. And what that means is in order to have your board certification, you need to have thousands of hours in practice in oncology and then sit for a boards exam every 5 years. And you have to recertify every 5 years too. So it's definitely a heightened level in oncology and specialty as a dietitian. And I'm also an adjunct professor teaching evidence-based oncology nutrition to graduate students. Now, this unfortunately isn't my only qualification to be able to talk about this. So this definitely is, the profession behind it, the passion, and a lot of the, very formal education. But I also, unfortunately, added to my list a breast cancer survivor as well. At the age of 33, I was diagnosed with invasive ductal carcinoma, which is a form of breast cancer. And this is a picture of me after surgery where I had a double mastectomy with D-flap reconstruction. For those of you that might not be familiar, D-flap reconstruction is actually a reconstruction of the breast that utilizes your own tissue to recreate the breast. So I do not have implants. I chose a D-flap route. It's a very intense surgery. It's about 10 hours in length and a very long recovery. And unfortunately, going into this surgery, we thought that all I needed to do was have surgery. And unfortunately, the surgical pathology came back different in that I did have to undergo chemotherapy and immunotherapy. So this is a picture of me going through chemo and immunotherapy. If you're wondering why I'm a recent breast cancer survivor and have this full length head of hair, I was very fortunate enough to be able to cold cap during my chemotherapy treatments and save roughly about 85% of my hair. And after chemotherapy, I had 3 months of chemotherapy and immunotherapy and moved forward and had another 9 months of immunotherapy for a full year of infusion treatments. And I'm so lucky to get to say that I got to ring that bell like many cancer patients get to do, but unfortunately not all get to do. And it signifies the end of your cancer treatments. And so I actually finished my cancer treatments on August 3rd of 2023. So I'm only a few months out of treatment, but I feel so honored and blessed and grateful to be able to be here today and share with you not only this journey, but how nutrition can play a really transformative role in cancer. And it's also important to note, so many people told me after my own diagnosis, goodness, Alison, you are one of the healthiest people I know. How could you get cancer? Right. And I think sometimes that can be really discouraging for some people. And sure, did I have moments where it was really discouraging to me? Right. Because when I went to the oncologist for the very first time, he asked me, certain things. If I did them, I essentially check every box when it comes to reducing the risk of cancer. and to show you that you can be young, you can be healthy, you can be the healthiest person that most people know. And unfortunately, you can still develop cancer. However, there still very much is so much hope in this. And the reason I share that is because I feel that my diet and lifestyle played an incredible role in helping me to get not only through surgery, but also chemotherapy and immunotherapy, and be able to live a high quality life through treatment and feel quite well considering the things that I was going through. So hopefully that can inspire you as well, no matter where you are in your journey, whether you come today as a cancer survivor yourself or interested in reducing your risk of cancer moving forward. All right, so the first myth that we are going to talk about is the myth that sugar feeds cancer, and therefore sugar and carbohydrates should be avoided at all costs. And if you want to go in show of hands, how many people have heard this before when it comes to that sugar feeds cancer, right? You can raise your hand or put in just the hand up. Yes, absolutely. There's so many people that have heard this. And I really want to set the record straight when it comes to this particular myth and this particular topic. So it's important to understand that more research is needed to understand the relationship between sugar in the diet and cancer. And also let me start off by saying there isn't anybody who promotes white, refined, processed sugar in the diet. Okay, there's not really anybody out there that I know of that is saying that this is healthy for us. However, I do see some perspective that there are some people out there that are saying that sugar doesn't matter, so go ahead and eat the Snickers bar whenever you want, right? And it doesn't mean you can never eat a Snickers bar, but there are some people that go to the extreme and saying, eating a diet high in sugar doesn't matter. And there's also this other extreme where saying that all cancer patients or cancer survivors should have 0 amounts of added sugar. Now, I will say that the less, the better. But what we also need to understand is it's a lot more complicated than that. It's not that simple. Okay, so the facts is that there's glucose, fructose, galactose, sucrose, the list goes on about all these different types of sugar that there actually are. Okay, there are combinations of these different types of sugars that create long chains, or what are called complex carbohydrates. So most people are familiar with the word glucose, right? Because this is the type of sugar that our food is turned into our bloodstream, right? So we eat carbohydrates and our body breaks that down into glucose. Okay, it's breaking, no matter if it starts as a really long chain carbohydrate or if it starts as a short chain, it breaks down into simple sugars like glucose. Okay, and we have trillions of cells in our body, and these different cells have different jobs. But glucose is the primary fuel source of every single one of those cells. Our body needs glucose. Okay, so when you think about that concept of that people should avoid all sugars and all carbohydrates, it's not that simple, because if we're avoiding all of those things, we're going to miss out on some healthy things too. So without carbohydrates, what a lot of people don't know is that if we don't have carbohydrates, our bodies actually know how to make it. Nothing that you need to remember here, but this is a term called gluconeogenesis. This is the process of creating glucose from non-carbohydrate sources in our body. Our bodies, if they don't have enough glucose, can make it on its own. That's how important it is that our bodies need glucose, is that it has alternative ways of getting it. Okay, let's take this a step further. Now, the concept of sugar and cancer and sugar feeds cancer is the fact that cancer cells typically, not all, but they grow quickly and they require a lot of energy, like glucose. Okay, so the thought process is, if cancer cells need a lot of glucose, then if we took all that glucose away, wouldn't the cancer cells stop growing? Right? Makes sense, and why that might be intuitive. However, it's not that simple. Okay. If we were to remove all carbohydrate-rich foods and thus all glucose, it would mean that we're losing out on a wide range of nutrients that actually support our immune system and complement the fight against cancer. Okay. I had an oncologist that I work with that we were talking about this concept, and he responded by saying, yes, you can take all the sugar away from cancer cells and it would die, right? And if we took all the sugar or the glucose away from us as humans, we would not thrive, and we would actually lose a bunch of weight. We wouldn't be able to maintain our health. And he said, it's just like cancer cells. If you took all the oxygen away from cancer cells, they would die. But who else would die? We would. Okay. So that's another way to think of it. So essentially, we can't take away all the glucose when we have cancer and when we're trying to fight it, because our body needs those important nutrients in order to support our body to actually fight against it. So here, this is, if you're not familiar with it, this is the third expert report from the World Cancer Research Fund and the American Institute for Cancer Research. Every 10 years, they do what's called the Continuous Update Project, where they go through all of the research that's available on nutrition, diet, and exercise and cancer, and try to come up with recommendations and conclusions about what the recommendations are to reduce the risk of cancer worldwide. So the most recent report was in 2018, and it was the third report that was ever done. You can go to get to their website and get this full report for free. I believe the full report is like 12,000 pages or something like that. It's something ridiculously long, but they also have a summary report that is also quite long, but you can go and see these recommendations firsthand. And what I like to point out here is that this is showing that when we're talking about vegetables, fruit, whole grains, that these contain phytochemicals, which are plant-based nutrients that have anti-cancer effects in cell and rodent studies because of their dietary fiber, carotenoids, and some of these other phytonutrients that are very beneficial for our health. Okay, so my point is that if we were to remove all sugar, all carbohydrates, all glucose from our body, we'd be missing out on these incredible nutrients as well. Okay, so am I saying that we shouldn't worry about sugar? Not quite. So it is a recommendation that we should aim for whole, unprocessed foods. Okay, the third expert report recommends with strong and convincing evidence that sugar-sweetened drinks increases the risk of weight gain, overweight, and obesity, which increases the risk of 13 different cancers, unfortunately. Okay, and that is related to increased inflammation, hormones, and growth factors. So just like Dr. Lieberman was talking about in the twin study, when they were having a really hard time increasing the calories in some of the plant-based individuals, that is one of those areas where diets that are high in these plant-based foods actually can lead to healthier weights in individuals and thus reduce the risk of cancer and also reduce inflammation, hormones, and other growth factors. Okay, so we do know with strong evidence that highly sweetened foods that are refined, do increase the risk of cancer. So we do want to try to avoid processed sugars as much as possible. We want to aim for getting our carbohydrates and therefore our glucose from fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes. Okay. Now, this is one of the big recommendations. The third expert report compiles 10 recommendations to help reduce the risk of cancer. This is one of their major ones, is that the diet should be rich in whole grains, vegetable, fruit, and beans. Okay, so as you can see, the myth of removing all sugars, all carbohydrates from the diet is not necessarily rooted in scientific evidence, because we do want these carbohydrates in our diet, and they should be a major part of the usual daily diet. So really, the World Health Organization and also here, the American Institute for Cancer Research and World Cancer Research Fund recommends a plant-based diet. And so does every other international agency on cancer as well. Okay, so these are the complex carbohydrates. I just added this in here because this was actually, if you follow me on Instagram, or if you want to follow me on Instagram, this was a post that I actually just made earlier today. And of course, I'm kind of using clickbait a little bit for people that are interested in trying to cut carbohydrates this year. And my response is in whatever shape that you want to, because my point is that we want to include these complex carbohydrates that unfortunately, because there's so much fear around this concept of sugar feeding cancer, a lot of people will start reducing or excluding these from their diet. And these are the things we want in the diet to support during cancer treatment and into survivorship. So of course, there is more to learn. We need to continue to research. However, what research is showing right now is that it's not necessarily sugar itself that increases the risk of cancer. However, sugar's relationship to higher insulin levels and related growth factors that influence cancer growth the most. So that really is to be said that if we're incorporating these fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes in their most whole unprocessed form as much as possible, we're going to have plenty of fiber. We're going to actually reduce those insulin levels and growth factors and reduce our risk of cancer overall. All right, so instead of it being myth, here is fact, is that the relationship between sugar and cancer is complex. Although research continues to investigate, current research recommends to make whole grains, vegetables, fruit, and legumes a major part of the usual daily diet. And again, this is the evidence that eating whole grains, fiber, vegetables, and fruit can help protect against certain cancers, as well as weight gain, overweight, and obesity. And this last quotation here comes from the third expert report. Okay, so there is information out there on nutrition and cancer that supports a plant-based diet very heavily. All right, let's go into this next myth that is one that I continue to hear over and over again, and I think I will continue to need to debunk over and over again, but let's do it here so that way everyone can be informed. Okay, so the myth is that soy contains estrogens, and I also put in quote phytoestrogens, which they do contain, and should be avoided to reduce cancer risk, especially for estrogen receptor positive breast cancers. This is the myth, and let's talk about why. It's time to set the record straight. And first of all, where does this myth even come from? Okay, so I think that this is really something interesting to share with people is where did this even start? Why is there even concern about it? So it actually started with primarily animal studies, not human studies. And one of them was a 1984 study of a cheetah that had determined that adding soy meal to its foods contributed to its inability to reproduce, okay, and therefore caused infertility. And then there was a 1998 study showing that a stimulated growth of mammary tumors or breast cancer tumors in mice when they were fed a high soy diet, they actually grew and breast cancer proliferated or spread. Okay, but these were mice that had their ovaries removed. They were implanted with with breast cancer, and they were fed a high soy diet. Okay, this is where it stems from. So the research, these are two examples of saying like, oh, if this happens in animals, we as humans need to avoid this, right? And it is true that soy is rich in something called isoflavones, which is a phytoestrogen. Okay, phyto is the Greek word for plant. Okay, so if we have plant estrogen, and then we know that there are types of breast cancer that are fueled by estrogen, the thought process is, well, why would we include soy if it contains phytoestrogens when we're trying to reduce estrogen in women that have hormonally positive breast cancer? Okay, so that's where it all comes from. But we've had so many different studies come through like that are human studies. And I think it's safe to say that we're not cheetahs or mice, right? Although there is something that can be gleaned from mice studies, et cetera, we are not mice. We need to take this a step further to human studies. So here's what I want you to know. And it does get a little scientific here, so try to follow along. And I'm happy to answer clarifying questions in the Q&A session if needed. But what a lot of people don't know is that there are two different receptors when it comes to estrogen, okay? There's an alpha and a beta receptor. In the breast, if it is an estrogen receptor, if it's an alpha receptor, so it's an estrogen receptor, which means that an estrogen receptor is essentially where the estrogen or the hormone can sit into it. I like to think of it as like a key and a lock. Only the right key is going to fit in the right lock. Okay, so estrogen is the only key that can fit into the estrogen receptor. Okay, so in the breast, if the alpha receptor is stimulated with estrogen, because remember, estrogen fits in that lock, then it can signal cancer cells to multiply and divide. Okay, so essentially, these cancer cells are fueled by estrogen. Okay, however, there's also the beta receptor. The beta receptor, okay, so it still allows estrogen to sit in it. It actually has an anti-estrogen effect. Okay, so we essentially have like a pro-estrogen effect and an anti-estrogen effect. Now, our natural human estrogen prefers to bind in the receptor alpha. Okay, so remember, when that alpha receptor is stimulated, it actually can signal cancer cells to grow, multiply, and divide. However, soy phytoestrogens, because they can fit in the lock, they prefer to bind to the beta. And they prefer to bind to beta 1,600% more. Okay, so I kind of think of it as like, imagine that there's these two little receptors sitting there, and you have human estrogen and you have phytoestrogens. They're going to try to race and get their preferred seat. Okay, so now, then someone might say, well, what happens if the phytoestrogen or the isoflavones found in soy, what if they actually sit in the alpha receptor? Okay, well, if it's been found that if they're sitting in the alpha receptor, it has 1/10 to 1/100th of the ability that human estrogen does. Meaning that if it takes up the space of alpha where the human estrogen prefers to sit, it's actually much, much, much weaker than human estrogen. Okay, so when we have phytoestrogens in the diet, they are going to sit in this beta receptor, preferably, where we're going to have an anti-estrogen effect that actually reduces the risk of hormone-positive breast cancer and other hormone-positive cancers, like prostate cancer, and some of the other reproductive gynecological cancers as well. Okay, so we actually see these really great benefits. And this one right here, I have the assumption that this group, maybe you haven't, there was a study that came out that showed that a low-fat, whole food, plant-based diet that incorporated a half a cup of edamame or soybeans per day actually reduced the risk and the frequency and severity of hot flashes. And I believe it was by up to 85%. Okay, so women, when they're experiencing menopause, perimenopause, and are experiencing hot flashes, this is related to estrogen. Soy-based foods actually can really help reduce hot flashes because of this reason right here. They sit in the beta receptor, having an anti-estrogen effect, which means it actually reduces hot flashes. Okay, and this goes for men as well that might be undergoing prostate cancer treatment and have to be on hormone therapy as well. They can experience hot flashes as well. Soy is so beneficial for this. So if anybody out there is experiencing hot flashes, I highly recommend adding soy to your diet if you haven't already. All right, go into just a little bit more research here. So research actually shows that intake of soy during childhood, adolescence, and adult life is associated with reduced breast cancer risk. And it is actually the strongest, most consistent when the soy consumption starts in childhood. Okay, this is one area that I missed out on. I can guarantee you I was not eating soy in my childhood. I grew up on what I would consider a standard healthy American diet, but definitely did not include tofu and edamame. But my kids, I have two kids, one that's 7 and one that's 2.5, and they both love tofu, so that's fantastic. One thing that I did find out with my own breast cancer diagnosis is I do carry a genetic mutation. And this genetic mutation runs pretty rampant through the family, we found out. And so when I think about my 2 young girls, I feel very hopeful that because we're including soy at such a young age, they may have this genetic mutation that we don't know about. They won't be tested until they're adults if they choose to be. But this is one area that I feel very confident about giving them soy, is that it actually can be more protective for them, where they already have an increased risk of breast cancer because of their mom and because of their grandma and genetic mutation. Now, there's also some question about whether or not soy can be consumed when someone's taking tamoxifen. Tamoxifen is a medication that is given to women after they have, if they have estrogen receptor positive breast cancer, and it's typically used in a woman that is premenopausal. It can be used in menopause for these women as well, but it's typically used premenopausal. And there was some concern of whether or not this, by having soy, would it reduce the effect of tamoxifen working? And research actually shows those that are eating the most tofu and soy milk had a 60% risk reduction in breast cancer recurrence for those women that were taking tamoxifen compared to those who were consuming low amounts. So the research is actually positive for that someone that's taking tamoxifen, by incorporating soy-based foods into their diet, they're actually reducing their risk of breast cancer even further. And research shows that consuming just a half of serving or 1 serving of soy per week, to give you an example, 1 serving of soy would be 1 cup of soy milk, actually found a 21% decrease in all-cause mortality and a 51% decrease in estrogen receptor cancers. And also, I think this is really important to point out, is that in a 32%, this was 51% decrease in estrogen receptor negative cancers, which is really positive, because if we have a triple negative breast cancer, we don't have as much research on this, and we don't have the same impressive treatments, I guess you could say, for triple negative. So when we see that there's nutrition that can help reduce the risk of recurrence in triple negative breast cancer, that's a huge win. And then also a 32% reduction for ER/PR positive cancers for people that might choose not to take tamoxifen. So all around, some really great benefits of including soy in the diet to reduce the risk of breast cancer and hormonal related positive cancers in the first place, but also in recurrence risk. So just to summarize this is that soy does not increase breast cancer, but in fact decreases the occurrence, recurrence, and death rates per a 2013 meta-analysis, which is linked here for when you get the slides if you want to go ahead and take a peek at it. This is also another study that I thought was this is a meta-analysis, meaning that it was looking at all the different studies that were available and the different criteria, and found that in 417 reports of human data on soy consumption, I think that's really important to emphasize, is it found that isoflavone intake, which is that phytonutrient from soy, does not adversely affect thyroid function, estrogen levels, ovulation in women, or semen levels in men, no negative effects in children. And because they've been classified as endocrine disruptors before, suggesting that they should not be classified as that, and that soy products are actually associated with reduced risk of breast and prostate cancer. Okay, so some really good positive stuff there. And 417 reports, that's pretty awesome. All right, so isoflavones, these really great properties in soy, exhibit anti-proliferative. Proliferation is essentially the growth and spread. So anti-proliferation is a good thing. Antioxidant, anti-angiogenesis. So angiogenesis is the process of a tumor creating its own blood supply. Okay, so we do not want a tumor to create its own blood supply. And so it exerts the anti-angiogenesis properties and also anti-inflammatory properties, reducing estrogen receptor negative tumors, which is a really, really positive thing, as I mentioned before. All right, and just a couple things to consider. We want to make sure that we have organic, non-GMO soy products. People ask me all the time how much soy is safe to consume, and most of the research overwhelmingly has 2 to 3 servings of soy food per day being shown to be safe. And this is actually what's pretty common in Asian populations, and sometimes even more than that in Asian populations that have lower risk of breast cancer than American populations. If you're going to choose the type of soy, we do recommend tempeh, miso, tamari, natto, tofu, edamame, roasted soybeans, and soy milk. It is true that we definitely want to try to make sure that we're choosing as much minimally processed or unprocessed foods as much as possible. And I like to think of like tofu and soy milk, like even though there is a level of processing there, they're smartly processed. Okay. So meaning that they can provide great benefits as well. For example, soy milk is a really great way to get calcium and plant-based protein into my kids, right? So they do provide great benefits. We do want to make sure that we're avoiding soy isolate supplements and other soy supplements. I wouldn't recommend somebody runs out and tries to find like a powdered soy to add to their products. But you want to try to use those whole soy products as much as possible rather than these isolate, which means that they take like a portion of the soy. Okay. All right. So the fact is that soy does not increase breast cancer, but in fact decreases the occurrence, recurrence, and death rates from breast cancer. Those that are looking to reduce their risk of developing breast cancer and its recurrence should consider regularly incorporating soy.
Come up here. Cars come close here.
There you go. I was able to mute her. Okay. All right. So our next myth that we're going to talk about is alkaline diets. Okay. Here all the time, even when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, someone told me that I should follow an alkaline diet. And the reason I laugh about that is because I don't think maybe they didn't realize what I did for a living. So it was kind of laughable for me. But so let's talk about this. Okay. So the myth is that cancer cells cannot survive in an alkaline environment. Therefore, consuming an alkaline diet is best for anyone with cancer. Let's dive into it. So the concept is that cancer cells can't survive in this alkaline environment, and therefore that they would thrive in an acidic environment. Okay. And the alkaline dietary approach is the idea that avoiding acidic foods and consuming alkaline foods can actually change the pH of our blood. That's the foundation of the concept. Now, when you type in acidic food list into Google, there's going to be lots of different things that pop up, and you're probably bound to get frustrated and overwhelmed because all of these food charts are going to be different. They're going to vary in one that's good and one that's bad and what to follow and what not to follow. It can be really frustrating and overwhelming. Now, here's the consensus of what an alkaline food would be versus the acidic foods. Okay. The alkaline foods would be fresh fruits and vegetables, plant protein, and alkaline water. Okay. Now, we know that fresh fruits and vegetables and plant proteins are great, okay? But keep going with me here, okay? And that the acidic foods we should avoid are high sodium foods, processed meat, processed cereal, eggs, caffeinated drinks, and alcohol, which most people aren't going to argue with some of those things, right? But also to avoid oats and whole grain products, nuts and seeds and beans and lentils. That doesn't leave a whole lot over here, does it? So we would be pretty malnourished if that's the only thing we can consume. That's where we need to have some of these beans and lentils and whole grain products. Now, there isn't a lot of consistency out there in terms of what is alkaline and what is not. When I think of alkaline and acidic, I often think about, we have a swimming pool at home, testing the water, right? And seeing where it is. So neutral is about 7, and acidic is less than 7, and that we're striving for alkaline over here. Again, here's that picture of, testing the pool. That's what I think of when I think of acidic and alkaline. Now, when it comes to the human body, our body is primarily neutral, and exactly 7 is neutral. But when we're a little bit higher than that, it is slightly alkaline. Okay. So we have a really tight, narrow range of 7.35 and 7.45. And our body actually has something, it works through something called an acid-base balance. So it's really that our body is working really hard continuously to always make sure it is staying in this very tight range. Okay. And in order to do that, our body uses its lungs and its kidneys and even its bones to help stay in this really tight control. Now, the pH of our blood needs to stay in this tight control. Otherwise, really bad things are going to happen. But the good news is that our body is actually pretty darn good at regulating our pH using our lungs, kidneys, and bones. One way it does it is that it releases calcium from the bones because calcium is alkaline and it can neutralize the acid. It's not necessarily a good thing for our health that it releases calcium from the bones, because that can weaken the bones. But its first and primary job is to take care of that really acute issue. And that acute issue is to make sure we stay in that really tight pH control. Other ways that it can do is that actually our lungs can increase or decrease breathing rate and change the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. So like hyperventilating and hypoventilating. This is actually controlling that pH. And then also our kidneys, I won't get into this too much, but it can reabsorb more or less bicarbonate to help stay within this pH. So really, truly, my point here is that our bodies actually do a really good job of this. And our diet actually has little influence over the pH of our blood. And if it did, we'd probably be in really big trouble, okay? So it is true that some people will say, but when I changed my diet and I ate more alkaline, I tested my saliva or my urine and it was more alkaline. Well, that can happen. It can change those things, but it isn't a true reflection of the pH of your blood. Now let's dive into a little bit more of the nutrition and the pH. So when you look at these two foods, what comes to mind? Are they acidic or alkaline, right? Most people are going to say, oh, that's a citrus fruit. It's acidic. Well, actually, lemons and oranges are alkaline because it depends on how our body digests and metabolizes a particular food. So it's not super intuitive about what's alkaline and what's not. But what does the research show? Okay, what we do know is that when we're eating high amounts of animal protein, it increases something called acid load. Okay, acid load is essentially thinking about where that body needs to stay in really tight control, but it's changing that pH by, okay, there's more animal protein. How do we adjust for this? Okay, and we know that high amounts of fruits and vegetables decrease acid load. Okay, now our bodies can break down and release calcium to neutralize acid. Okay, we talked about this a little bit. Keep following along with me. I promise we'll get to the point here. Diets high in animal protein actually show an increased risk of osteoporosis. So even though animals that might be, diets that might be high in dairy, for example, it is true that they are high in calcium, but they're also high in animal protein that increases acid load. And because the body is trying to take care of that acid load, it is actually taking calcium out of the bones to try to neutralize it. And that can increase the risk of osteoporosis. So because I'd like to take a moment to, okay, what do we currently understand, Allison, and where are we going with this? We know that our body needs to stay in tight pH control or problems exist. Our body has several ways to do this, primarily through our lungs, kidneys, and bones. And whether a food is considered acidic or alkaline is dependent on how they're digested and metabolized. Certain foods, such as high amounts of animal protein, can actually increase the acid load in the body, but it doesn't ultimately alter the pH of our blood, as our body has tight mechanisms to really keep that pH in tight control. Okay, so you can still have high acid load, and the pH of your blood is going to stay consistent within that tight range of 7.35 and 7.45. Okay, and diets that are high in animal proteins have been shown to have higher acid load, whereas diets high in vegetables and fruits may reduce acid load. Okay, now, initial studies on the alkaline diet in cancer were derived from studies that were conducted in the laboratory study rather than a human body. Okay, they pretty much saw that cancer cells in a petri dish did not survive in an alkaline diet. We are not petri dishes. We are way more complex than that. Okay, so there are the human studies today are still lacking, but we do have a few of them. This one right here shows that the higher the acid loads that we have in foods, the higher the risk of breast cancer. The higher the meat consumption, the higher breast cancer risk. The higher the fruit and vegetable consumption, the lower the breast cancer risk. Okay. So here's another study that is very similar to this, that again, if we increase acid load, we have increased inflammation, high blood sugars, which is actually a risk factor for breast cancer and other types of cancer. So these studies suggest higher acid load may increase the risk of breast cancer. So you might be asking yourself, but Allison, isn't that the alkaline diet? Isn't that what you just told us? Well, current research points more strongly that these improved health benefits are coming from phytochemicals, fiber, vitamins, and minerals that are present in a high plant-based diet, rather than its alkaline versus acid load. And I think where this is really most important is when someone is trying to achieve an alkaline diet, it is really intense and it's really restrictive, and we might be losing out on some really great benefits. But instead, if we can just potentially use the improved health benefits that come from phytochemicals, fiber, vitamins, and minerals, you don't have to concern yourself whether it's acidic or whether it is alkaline, because you're going to have those health benefits. So what am I saying? That a high consumption of vegetables and fruits with limited meat intake is consistent with evidence-based recommendations from the American Cancer Society, the American Institute for Cancer Research, and World Cancer Research Fund. And if the interpretation of an alkaline diet is to avoid whole grains, legumes, and certain fruits, remember we saw that on that first screen where I showed you what is alkaline, the fresh fruits and vegetables and plant proteins. But a lot of alkaline diets restrict whole grains and legumes, then it does not follow the recommended eating pattern to reduce cancer risk. Okay. Again, we have this here that shows, if we're going to get rid of whole grains in the body, we're getting rid of some very potential incredible benefits, such as that there's strong evidence that consuming whole grains helps protect against colorectal cancer. That consuming dietary fiber helps protect against colorectal cancer, weight gain, overweight, and obesity, right? So my point is don't necessarily concern yourself with alkaline versus acidic. Eat whole, unprocessed plant foods, and you're already going to be getting the great benefits. So what's the bottom line? Is that there are important, clear inconsistencies when it comes to the alkaline diet and well-established evidence-based recommendations in nutrition for reducing the risk of cancer and its recurrence. In case you had the question about alkaline water, the research is just lacking, and its use is not justified, and it can be a quite expensive cost. So drink good filtered water, and I don't recommend wasting your money on alkaline water. All right, so what do we know? We have limited studies on alkaline diet and cancer, but the reduction in cancer risk pretty much comes from the high consumption of fruits and vegetables and limited consumption of meats that are consistent with evidence-based recommendations. More human studies are needed, but in the meantime, current evidence reflects that a diet rich in whole grains, vegetables, fruits, and beans is recommended as the nutrition approach to help reduce cancer risk and its recurrence, and should be a major part of your diet. Hopefully by now you're like, okay, Allison, this is what we're doing here, right? And I think sometimes it's really important to understand the why, the research, so that you can stay more motivated and inspired to incorporate more of these foods into your diet. All right, so this is our last myth today. And the myth is that a cancer survivor should do everything possible to consume only organic foods as part of a cancer fighting diet. Okay. Now, I am not saying that organic foods are not good for us or that we shouldn't be buying them, because I do believe there could be some benefits to it. However, what happens a lot of times in cancer survivors' minds is that they need to consume only organic foods. And therefore, if they cannot afford or have access to organic produce or organic foods, then they might just not eat them at all. Okay. So the important thing is to remember is that we should always consume as many fruits and vegetables as possible. This recommendation is more important than whether these foods are organic or not. Okay. Furthermore, what does the research currently say? And you know what? There is more research that needs to be done in this area. This is a particular study from 2014 that found 623,000 UK women that were followed for 9 years, found that there was little or no decrease in the incidence of cancer with the consumption of organic food, with the exception of possibly non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. I thought that was a very interesting study, and finding that there was some increased risk with this type of lymphoma. Furthermore, keep in mind that those who choose organic foods are more likely to exercise, not smoke, incorporate other healthy lifestyle factors, have higher education, have higher income, and improve access to healthcare. Okay, so these are some factors that really make a difference. Now, when it comes to the antioxidant activity against cancer, it is true that the antioxidant activity against cancer in a petri dish has been shown that organic foods, in this case, organic berries, actually can suppress cancer growth better than conventionally grown produce. But again, keep in mind is that if it's happening in a petri dish, but organic produce also tends to be up to 40% more expensive. There are many people in this country that cannot afford that. And so we really want to promote and encourage fruit and vegetable intake first, okay? And that's something that I want everybody to keep in mind is if you have access to organics, if you can afford them, then is it better to eat organic? There's possibility that maybe research will show us that it's incrementally better. Is it better than for the environment? Quite possibly, right? There's so many of these other things, but keep in mind that eating fruits and vegetables, period, is what's important, okay? So the scientific literature demonstrates over and over again that a diet that's focused on all of these things that I keep talking about is the most important thing. However, whereas the scientific literature does not clearly conclude that buying and consuming organic produce drastically reduces our risk of cancer or improves our overall health, okay? So again, I think organic foods are great, but there's not a lot of people that have great access to them and can afford them. I can tell you, like, my family cannot afford a $9 tub of strawberries in January in Wisconsin, right? So if the strawberries look good and I have access to them, I will get strawberries. Now, we do try to take advantage of like frozen organic berries that we can get from Costco because they're much more affordable. And so those things need to be taken into account when it comes to individual nutrition considerations, is sometimes people are just putting out these blanket statements out there, not considering the other aspects of somebody else's situation. So in the end, the scientific literature demonstrates over and over again that you should really just choose whole plant-based foods as much as possible, always consuming more fruits and vegetables. And that is more important than whether or not they're organic or not. Okay. All right. So that concludes all the different myths. I know some of them we got pretty scientific in some of them, so I'm hopeful that I was able to provide some clarification and what that science was so you could really take away and understand. But that takeaway from all of these myths is that, yes, research is not 100% conclusive. And I think what was really one part of the things that was really great about the twin study, and to be honest, I only watched the first 2 episodes so far, but they talk about how difficult nutrition research is to do. And I think there's a lot of people out there that will talk about, well, this study was flawed and this study did that. Like, yes, those are considerations that we need to keep in mind. However, if people are going to sit and wait for the perfect double-blind randomized control trial to come out, we're not going to see it anytime soon, okay? Because it costs a lot of money, right? I remember one physician saying that in order to be able to figure out what is the best diet for humans, we would have to randomize thousands of women months before they conceive, randomize them to a plant-based diet, and let's say a healthy omnivorous diet, follow them through their pregnancy, and then follow their offspring for a lifetime and randomize their diets, right? That's impossible and never going to happen. So keep in mind is that, yes, the research not conclusive, but I do believe that we have to operate off the best available evidence that we have at the time. And the best available evidence shows that we should do more whole unprocessed foods, particularly fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes. So that is the takeaway, and hopefully you provide some more insight about cancer nutrition and feel more confident in dispelling some of these myths. I just want to point out, if you are interested in finding more of my work, you can find me on Instagram at wholesome.cancer.nutrition. This is the social media platform that I'm most active on, but I do have a Facebook, and I also have a website. And the website is wholesomellc.com. On there, you can learn about my coaching programs. I have group coaching programs and individual coaching programs. They are not exclusive for individuals that have cancer, but I do work predominantly with cancer patients or individuals that are high risk for cancer, or are just simply interested in reducing the risk of developing cancer and chronic disease and want to learn more about a plant-based diet. If you head over to my website, I also have a free 5-day plant-based guide. So if you're looking for some more inspiration on how to start a plant-based diet, or if you've been following a plant-based diet for a while and just want some new recipes, you can go out to my website and find the 5-day meal plan.
Now, let me quickly mention our next monthly meeting will be February 8th, and we'll post the speakers up there probably in the next week or two. If you'd like to receive notice, and I know somebody mentioned how do you find out about these and get alerts, just register on pbnow.org and you'll get alerts before each one of the meetings. Also like to remember, if you'd like to check out our past meetings, you can go to the video library section on our website, or just go to YouTube under PB Now, and you can go back and find and go to videos and go. You can go back and find entire videos or just skim through them. Alison should be up in probably a week to 10 days, depending upon our tech person, how quickly they can get it up there. Thanks again to Alison so much. Thank you so much for doing this tonight. Thank you, Dr. Lieberman. Thank you, Amberly, for sharing your valuable time and knowledge with us tonight. Thanks for coming, everybody, and hope to see you next time.